Tell me where
You'd
he
remember a
went,
night
or
with
you
me
will
for the
regret
rest
it.
of your life.
I
The
cannot.
Alpha King
I
growled
don't know.
softly.
Let go of me.
Rain lashed the windows, streaking the glass with silver lines, and in the distance, lightning split the sky like a jagged blade. Within the shadowed halls, torches flickered, casting long, uneven shadows that danced across the cold stone. Tonight, the citadel was alive with a restless energy, as if it were waiting for something, or someone. The outsider had not expected to reach this place. Sent as a messenger from a distant land, or perhaps drawn by a curiosity they could not explain, they had wandered through dense forests and forgotten roads. Now, standing at the massive gates of the Alpha King's fortress, they felt a strange pull, equal parts awe and fear. The air was heavy with magic, though the outsider could not name it. It was not the pleasant magic of candles and charms. It was darker, older, a force that thrummed beneath the stones themselves. The guards at the gate were statues of steel and leather, eyes sharp as knives, their hands resting on the hilts of massive swords. Yet, as the outsider approached, there was a hesitation in their stance. The outsider stepped forward with careful grace, holding only a letter sealed with black wax. The seal bore a mark they had never seen before, a crescent moon intertwined with a clawed hand. "I carry a message for the Alpha King," the outsider said, voice steady despite the wind tugging at their cloak. The guards exchanged a glance. One stepped forward, towering, his eyes narrowing. "Few outsiders come here willingly. The king does not see them lightly." The gates swung open before any answer could be given. It was as if the fortress itself had decided that the outsider would pass. Inside, the halls were vast and silent, the torches casting long, wavering shadows. The air smelled of old stone and iron, faintly of blood, and beneath it all, a strange sweetness, like winter roses blooming in darkness. At the heart of the citadel, the Alpha King waited. He stood on the balcony overlooking the storm, the moonlight catching his hair in a halo of silver. He was tall, imposing, and regal, yet there was something raw and dangerous about him, a power that seemed to hum in the air around him. His eyes, dark as a winter night, turned toward the outsider with a slow, measuring gaze. "You've come far," he said, his voice low and resonant, carrying over the wind. "Few survive the forest without losing their way or themselves." The outsider swallowed. "I bring a message and a request for knowledge," they said, holding out the letter. The king's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile as he took it. "Knowledge is always costly here," he said softly, the sound of his voice curling around the outsider like smoke. "And some knowledge changes you forever. Are you willing to pay that price?" Before the outsider could answer, a sudden chill swept through the balcony. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the wind seemed to carry whispers, words just beyond comprehension. The outsider shivered, instinctively reaching for the hilt of the small dagger at their belt. The king watched silently, his expression unreadable. "Fear is natural," he said, "but curiosity is dangerous. You should know, child, that you may remember a night with me for the rest of your life." His words were a growl, soft yet threatening, echoing through the bones of the outsider. The outsider's heart pounded. Something in his voice reached into a part of them they had never known, a mixture of command and invitation, danger and promise. Yet even as the words settled, they felt the pull of the citadel, the power that seemed to wrap itself around them, tightening like a living chain. He stepped closer. His shadow stretched across the balcony, long and dark, covering the outsider almost completely. "Come," he said simply, extending a hand. "Walk with me if you dare. The night is long and secrets do not reveal themselves easily." The outsider hesitated only a moment before stepping onto the balcony, drawn by a combination of fear and fascination. The storm raged around them, lightning illuminating the king's face, revealing the harsh lines of a man who had known both love and ruin. They walked in silence, the wind and rain a chorus around them, until they reached the citadel's heart, a hidden garden walled in stone, where black roses grew under the pale light of the moon. The garden was unlike anything the outsider had seen. Twisting paths of marble led to fountains that were dry, yet glistened with an otherworldly sheen. Shadows seemed to move in the corners, but when the outsider looked directly, they found nothing there. The roses bloomed even in the storm, petals black as midnight, their scent intoxicating and faintly dangerous. "This place is alive," the outsider whispered. "It feels aware." The king's lips curved into a faint, grim smile. "It is," he said. "Everything here is bound to me. To my will, to my curse." The word curse caught the outsider off guard. They looked at him, heart tightening. "A curse," he nodded slowly. "A legacy of power and isolation. I am bound to this land, and this land is bound to me. Those who enter must tread carefully, for the shadows remember everything." The outsider swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the words. They had expected a ruler, perhaps a man of charm or cruelty, but not this mixture of menace and sorrow. They felt the edges of something dark pressing close, yet beneath it all a strange longing that drew them forward. "Why tell me this?" they asked. "Why me?" The king's gaze softened just slightly. "Because you are not like the others," he said. "You do not flinch at the storm. You do not fear the shadows, and that makes you dangerous, or perhaps necessary." Before the outsider could respond, a howl tore through the night. It was not the wind nor the storm. Something real, wild, and hungry. From the edge of the garden, spectral shapes emerged, wolves, their eyes burning like coals, their bodies made of shadows and mist. The outsider stumbled back, heart hammering. The king stepped forward, voice commanding, low and dangerous. "Stay calm. They are bound to me. They obey my will." The wolves circled, their forms shifting in and out of solidity, eyes glowing in the pale moonlight. The outsider felt a shiver run down their spine, both in fear and in awe. The king's presence seemed to command the very night itself, bending it to his power. "You see," he said, his voice a soft growl, "this world is not kind to strangers, and yet here you stand, alive. Perhaps fate has more in store for you than mere survival." The outsider looked into his eyes, trying to read the man beneath the power, beneath the curse. There was pain there, yes, but also an undeniable hunger for understanding, for connection, perhaps even for redemption. And despite the danger, despite the unnatural creatures circling them, the outsider felt a pull they could not resist. The king's shadow stretched long in the torchlight as he stepped closer. "Do you feel it?" he asked. "The weight of what is possible and what is forbidden." I feel it," the outsider admitted. Their voice was barely more than a whisper, carried away by the wind. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not threatening, not entirely reassuring. "Then tonight will change you," he said, "whether you wish it or not." The wolves shifted again, moving closer, yet the king's hand rested lightly on their heads. In that moment, the outsider realized that his power was not merely physical, but something older, something that bent even the natural world to his will. And as they looked into his eyes, they understood a terrible, thrilling truth. To be near him was to step into a life of danger and fascination, one that could consume them, or transform them forever. The first raindrops of a sudden storm began to fall heavier, drumming on the marble paths of the garden. The outsider felt the cold bite of the rain, but even through the storm, the king's presence was a warmth they could not resist. He stepped close, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a growl softened by something almost tender. "You would remember a night with me," he said, "for the rest of your life." The outsider's breath caught. They felt it, not just the words, but the weight behind them, the promise and the threat intertwined, as inescapable as the storm itself. And then, from the edge of the garden, the shadows surged forward. The spectral wolves leapt, and the outsider realized with a shock that they were truly alone, alone with the king and whatever fate he would bring. The night had begun. And nothing would ever be the same. The storm outside had not yet passed when the Alpha King led the outsider deeper into the citadel. The halls seemed endless, twisting like the corridors of a labyrinth, their walls lined with ancient tapestries that whispered of battles and betrayals long past. Candles flickered in sconces, casting a warm, fragile light that barely pushed back the shadows. Each step echoed, sharp and deliberate, as if the citadel itself was listening to their passage. The outsider's heart still pounded from the encounter in the garden. The spectral wolves had dissolved into mist, leaving only the king's commanding presence behind. Even now, a shiver ran down their spine at the memory of his eyes, dark, fierce, yet hauntingly lonely. It was difficult to understand such a man. He was both protector and predator, ruler and prisoner of his own curse. The king walked with a quiet grace, his boots silent on the stone. Occasionally, he would glance at the outsider, his gaze lingering just long enough to make the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Though his expression remained controlled, the outsider sensed that beneath the surface, emotions churned like storm clouds, anger, desire, and a profound sadness. "This citadel is older than most kingdoms," the king said, his voice low and smooth, "and older than my own reign. The walls have seen victories, betrayals, and deaths that would chill your blood." "I can feel it," the outsider replied, their voice trembling slightly, not entirely from fear. "There's a presence here, in everything." He smiled faintly, a curve of lips that was both cruel and enticing. "You feel it because you are attuned. Most are blind to it. Most would have turned and fled by now." They entered a hall where the floor shimmered with black marble, reflecting the candlelight like dark water. At the far end, a pair of doors loomed, carved with symbols of moons and claws. The king paused before them, placing a hand on the intricate carvings. "Beyond this lies knowledge that is forbidden," he said, glancing at the outsider. "Few are allowed here. Fewer still survive the truths it contains." The outsider swallowed. I am not afraid." "Good," he murmured, stepping aside to let them enter. "Curiosity is both a gift and a curse. In your case, it may be both." Inside, the room was lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, filled with tomes bound in leather, vellum, and even strange, shadowed materials that seemed to breathe. The air smelled of old paper, ink, and something darker, like secrets waiting to be discovered. The outsider ran their fingers along the spines of the books, sensing the power contained within. Some seemed almost alive, pulsing softly under their touch. "These are not ordinary books," the king said, his voice now closer, brushing against the outsider's ear as he spoke. "They contain the histories of the cursed, the lost, and the damned. They speak of power that can heal, destroy, or enslave. You must choose carefully what you learn here, for knowledge can be as lethal as any blade." The outsider felt a thrill of fear and fascination. "And your curse?" they asked, the question slipping out before they could stop it. He studied them for a moment, eyes narrowing. "My curse," he stepped back, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "It is a burden I inherited, a power that I cannot fully control. It feeds on fear, desire, and loyalty. Those who draw near me feel it even if they do not understand. Some are consumed by it. Others survive but never leave unchanged." The outsider's pulse quickened. "And me?" He tilted his head, studying them as one might examine a rare gem. "You are different. Most would not have entered this room. Most would have fled at the first sign of shadows moving against them. You stay." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That makes you dangerous. Or perhaps necessary." The outsider felt a flush rise to their cheeks. There was something magnetic about him, something that made their blood rush and their mind whirl. They did not understand it, could not explain it, and yet they could not resist it. He reached out, almost touching their arm, and the outsider felt a spark of something wild and unspoken. "The night is not safe," he said softly. "It tests us. It shows us what we fear and what we desire. Tonight you will see both." As if on cue, the room darkened. Shadows twisted along the walls, stretching and writhing like living things. The outsider's breath caught in their throat. "These are my servants," the king said quietly, gesturing to the shadows. "Bound to me. They are harmless unless commanded otherwise. But they can reveal truths you may not be ready for." The outsider swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. There was danger here, yes, but also a strange allure, as if the night itself wanted them to stay. The king stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Do you wish to know my truth?" he asked. "To see the man behind the crown, the ruler behind the legend?" The outsider nodded, though their heart pounded in fear and anticipation. He led them to a circle of black candles, their flames flickering like living eyes. "Sit," he commanded, and they obeyed. He knelt opposite them, placing a hand on the ground between them. The shadows in the room seemed to gather, forming shapes that whispered secrets of the past, echoes of laughter, cries, and battles long forgotten. "This ritual is not dangerous if you trust me," he said softly, "but it will show you my soul and perhaps the darkness that binds me." The outsider took a deep breath, focusing on the king's hand and the warmth that radiated from it. "I trust you," they said, though their voice wavered. The king's eyes softened just slightly. "Good," he murmured. He began to chant in a language older than the walls themselves, words curling through the air like smoke. Shadows coiled around the circle, forming images that danced before the outsider's eyes. They saw a man, young and strong, leading armies into battle. They saw betrayal, friends turning into enemies, and a night of fire that left him alone and cursed. They saw a crown heavy with responsibility, yet stained with sorrow. And then they saw him, not as a king, but as a man who longed for connection, for love, for redemption. The outsider's heart ached at the sight, feeling an empathy they had not expected. The king's voice softened and the shadows faded. He looked at the outsider with an intensity that made them shiver. "You see now, you understand the weight I bear." I do," the outsider whispered. "You are not just a king, you are lonely and burdened." He nodded, a flicker of relief passing through his eyes. "Yes, and yet I am bound to this curse. I cannot escape it alone. That is why your presence is troubling and necessary." The room was silent, save for the whisper of the storm outside. The outsider felt the tension between them, thick and unyielding. They were drawn to him, and yet the danger of that attraction was clear. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. "The pull between us, the danger, the desire." The outsider's breath caught. I do," they admitted. A smile curved his lips, faint and dangerous. "Then you understand, this is no ordinary night. It is a night that will change everything, and you will remember it forever." Before they could speak again, the candles flickered violently. The shadows in the room writhed and surged, forming shapes that lunged toward them. The outsider gasped, fear and excitement mingling in equal measure. The king's hand shot out, drawing the shadows back. "Stay close," he commanded. "Trust me. The night tests us all, and only those who endure it can see the dawn." The outsider felt their heart race as he stood, close enough that they could feel the warmth radiating from him. His eyes, dark and magnetic, held theirs, daring them to step closer, daring them to surrender to the pull between them. "You are not afraid?" he asked softly, the growl in his voice tempered with something almost tender. "I am curious," the outsider admitted. "And I trust you." He studied them for a long moment and then nodded. "Then let the night continue. You will see who I am and I will see who you are." The shadows shifted again, forming a pathway deeper into the citadel. The outsider knew they were stepping into the unknown, yet they could not turn back. They were drawn forward, not just by curiosity, but by the undeniable connection that hummed between them. As they walked, the king's presence was a constant weight beside them, dangerous, alluring, and impossible to ignore. The storm outside began to calm, but the storm inside the citadel, and inside their hearts, had only just begun. The chamber of mirrors was silent except for the outsider's quiet breath. Each reflection rippled strangely, showing not only their form but subtle distortions, twisted images of fear, desire, and potential darkness. The Alpha King's presence beside them was immense, a force of will and power that seemed to warp the very air. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if weighing every step. "You see them," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight the outsider could feel in their bones. "They are not illusions, they are possibilities. The choices we make, the paths we refuse or take, they follow us. They live in the shadows of who we are." The outsider felt a chill, a shiver that was not caused by the faint cold of the chamber. "Are these what you feel every day?" they asked, staring into a mirror that showed themselves older, tired, and alone. The king nodded. "Yes. And more. Every night I face what could have been, what I could become if I fail. That is the curse that binds me. I am haunted by power I cannot control and by choices I cannot undo. Most would run from it. Most would break." The outsider's hand found his. They felt the warmth beneath the cold, the strength beneath the shadows. "Then you are not weak," they said softly. "You endure it. You fight it." He looked at them sharply, and for a moment his usual guarded expression softened. "Perhaps. But even kings need a reason not to fall." A silence fell between them, heavy and charged. In that moment the outsider felt the pull of his power not as fear, but as fascination. They did not know why, but they trusted him. The shadows in the room seemed to lean closer, curious, whispering their own dark songs. Before either could speak again, a sudden commotion echoed from the hall outside. The king's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. "Trouble," he muttered. "And it comes faster than I expected." The outsider's pulse quickened. "What kind of trouble?" He gestured toward a smaller door hidden in the corner of the chamber. "One that may cost you more than you are ready to give. Stay close. And remember, trust me." They followed him into the hall, which was darker than before. Torches burned low, their flickering light casting shadows that seemed almost alive. The air smelled of smoke and wet stone. Ahead, figures moved with purpose, cloaked and hooded. The outsider recognized the markings of a rival lord's guards, people known for their cunning and cruelty. "They seek to exploit me," the king said, voice low, a dangerous edge sharpening his words. "They know of the curse. They want to use it to destroy me." The outsider's heart pounded. "And me?" He glanced at them, a faint, grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You are collateral, or perhaps the key. That remains to be seen." With a sudden, swift movement he gestured, and the shadows along the walls sprang to life. They twisted and surged, forming barriers that blocked the intruder's advance. The outsider watched, wide-eyed, as darkness bent to his will, shaping itself into a living defense. "You control them?" they asked, all lacing their voice. "I command them," he corrected, his tone precise. "But command alone is not enough. I must balance power with control, otherwise it consumes everything, including me." The outsider felt a wave of empathy. They were beginning to understand him, not just the Alpha King, but the man beneath the crown and the curse. His power was immense, but it was tethered to his fears, his desires, and his solitude. Suddenly, one of the intruders lunged forward, dagger raised. In an instant, the king moved, a blur of motion, intercepting the attack. The outsider felt the surge of his power ripple through the air, a force that knocked them backward but left them unharmed. Shadows clung to him, striking with precise, terrifying accuracy, scattering the intruders. The outsider's breath came in ragged gasps. You saved us," they whispered. He looked at them, his expression unreadable. "I do not save easily. But some things are worth the risk." His eyes lingered on them, dark and intense, and the outsider felt their cheeks warm. The intruders fled, their plans thwarted, but the tension in the citadel did not ease. The king turned to the outsider, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "Do you see now?" he asked softly. "Even in danger, even in darkness, there is choice. There is hope, but it comes at a cost." The outsider nodded, though their mind raced with questions. And what cost will we pay? He studied them silently for a moment, as if measuring their courage. Tonight you will see how deep the curse runs. You will see what I am capable of and what I could lose, and then you will decide if you stay. He led them to a chamber deeper in the citadel, one lit by a single, flickering torch. In the center, a black stone pedestal held an orb of shimmering darkness. Shadows danced within it, forming faces that twisted in pain, longing, and rage. The outsider felt their stomach tighten as they realized the orb contained fragments of the king's past, moments of betrayal, loss, and suffering that had shaped him into who he was. "This is my truth," he said quietly. "Every regret, every sorrow captured here. I carry it always, and those who come close feel it too." The outsider reached out, their hand hovering over the orb. "It's heavy," they whispered. "I can feel it." He nodded, his gaze locked on theirs. "It is, and yet it can be lifted if one is brave enough. If one dares to confront it." A sudden, sharp sound echoed through the chamber. A trapdoor opened in the floor, and shadows surged from the darkness below. The outsider stumbled back, but the king's hand shot out, steadying them. His eyes glowed with a fierce light, a mix of power and emotion that made the outsider's heart race. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. The outsider nodded, though fear and anticipation twisted together in their chest. "I do." He extended his hand fully. "Then come, face the night with me." Together, they stepped onto the platform, and the shadows below shifted into a swirling vortex of light and darkness. The outsider felt themselves pulled forward, not by force, but by the undeniable connection between them. In that moment they understood. To be with him was to risk everything, yet to turn away was impossible. The king's presence enveloped them, a mix of power, protection, and something far more intimate. The orb of darkness pulsed, showing visions of the king's past, moments of violence, despair, and isolation, but also fleeting glimpses of kindness, longing, and love he had never allowed himself to feel. The outsider reached out, touching his arm. "You do not have to carry this alone," they said softly. He looked at them, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the mask of power. "I have not allowed anyone to see this before. Most would flee at the sight, but you remain." A silence settled over them, charged with unspoken emotions. The shadows in the chamber seemed to pause, as if holding their breath. The king's hand lingered near theirs, close enough to touch, but he did not move it. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked quietly. The pull, the connection, the danger. The outsider's heart beat faster. "Yes," they whispered, "I feel it." A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. "Then you understand. The night is not just darkness and fear. It is a test, a challenge, and a promise." Before they could respond, a sudden gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the torch. The shadows surged violently, and the orb began to glow brighter, revealing a hidden message. A warning of betrayal within the citadel, a traitor among the king's own guards. The outsider's eyes widened. "A traitor?" The king's expression darkened. "Yes, and soon you will see how close betrayal can come, and how trust must be forged in the fire of danger." He took the outsider's hand fully, the warmth and strength of his grip anchoring them. "Tonight will demand courage. Tonight will test everything you believe about me and yourself." The shadows twisted, forming shapes that lunged toward them. But this time the outsider did not recoil. They stood firm, heart racing, side by side with the king. Together, they faced the darkness, bound not only by circumstance but by a connection neither fully understood, and yet could not deny. The whispers of betrayal had barely faded when the Alpha King led the outsider through winding corridors deeper into the citadel. The air was thick with the scent of rain, stone, and something older, an ancient magic that hummed under the walls and floors. Every step seemed measured, deliberate, and the outsider could feel the weight of what awaited them. The final test of the curse, the truth of the king, and the fate of both their hearts. The king stopped before a massive set of doors carved from blackened oak, their surfaces etched with symbols older than the kingdom itself. Shadows pooled at the base, writhing like living creatures. He turned to the outsider, eyes intense and unyielding. "This is the chamber of the night," he said softly. "Here the curse reveals its full power. Here we face the truth of ourselves. Few have survived it and none have left unchanged." The outsider's breath caught. "And we will survive." He smiled faintly, a dangerous curve that held both threat and promise. "We may if we trust one another. That is the only way." The outsider nodded, hand brushing against his as they stepped forward. The doors creaked open, revealing a vast hall bathed in a blood-red glow. The walls shimmered as if alive, reflecting twisted images of every failure, fear, and longing they had ever known. Shadows shifted constantly, forming shapes of creatures and people, friends and enemies, reality and memory. "This place," the outsider whispered. "It feels alive." "It is," the king said, his voice a low growl that resonated in the hall. "The curse is a living force. It feeds on fear, regret, and desire, but it can also be tamed if one dares to confront it fully." The shadows surged forward suddenly, and the outsider stumbled back. The king's hand shot out, steadying them, and in that instant the room seemed to recognize their union. The shadows paused, as though the power of trust and connection had given them pause. "You must see it not as a threat but as part of us," he said quietly. "Only then can the curse be broken, and only then can you both survive the night intact." The outsider swallowed, feeling both fear and courage rising together. "Then I will see it," they said, stepping forward, hand in his. "Whatever comes, I will face it with you." The king's eyes softened just slightly and he nodded. "Good, that is the first step." The shadows condensed around the center of the hall, forming a massive, swirling vortex of darkness and light. Within it, visions unfolded. Moments of the king's past, battles he had fought, people he had lost, decisions that had haunted him for decades. The outsider saw him not as a ruler, but as a man carrying unimaginable weight. They saw his fear, his longing, and the love he had never allowed himself to feel. "It is all so heavy," the outsider whispered, voice trembling. "I can feel every part of it." "Yes," the king said, stepping closer. "And that is why you must be here. The curse is not just mine, it touches everyone who comes close. Only through connection, through trust, can it be overcome." He gestured toward the vortex. "Step forward, face it, face me." The outsider hesitated, then took a deep breath and stepped into the swirling shadows. The coldness of the magic pressed against their skin, and they felt memories that were not theirs brushing against their mind. Fear, sorrow, moments of betrayal. Yet beneath it all, they felt the warmth of the king's presence, anchoring them, protecting them. "You are not alone," he said, his hand finding theirs firmly. "You are my anchor, and I will hold you." The outsider's pulse raced, a strange mixture of fear and wonder filling them. "And you will survive this," he nodded. "I can with you." His voice was low, vulnerable, and for the first time he allowed a flicker of the man beneath the crown and the curse to show. Together they stepped deeper into the vortex. The visions around them grew more intense, more personal. The king's failures and regrets swirled before them, times he had used his power in anger, nights he had spent alone, the isolation imposed by his curse. The outsider felt a pang of sorrow for him and yet also a surge of admiration. He had endured, carried the weight, and yet had not lost his humanity. "You see," he whispered, "this is what I have lived with every day, every night, and now you see it too." The outsider looked at him, heart aching with empathy. "I see it, and I accept it, all of it." A sudden surge of energy rippled through the hall. The shadows coalesced into a single massive form, the embodiment of the curse itself. A swirling, shifting mass of black and crimson, eyes glowing with ancient malice. It roared, a sound that shook the stones beneath their feet. The outsider stepped back instinctively, but the king's hand gripped theirs tightly. "Do not fear it," he commanded. "We face it together." The shadows lunged at them, but the king moved with speed and precision, his power flowing through him like a living thing. He stood between the outsider and the darkness, arms outstretched, and the shadows recoiled. Then, slowly, he began to speak words in the old language of the citadel, the words of binding and release, of trust and surrender. The outsider joined him, repeating the words as best they could, feeling the rhythm, feeling the power that flowed between them. With each uttered phrase, the shadows quivered, then softened, then began to dissolve. The curse, sensing the unity between them, recoiled, no longer able to feed on fear or desire. The vortex of darkness collapsed in on itself, leaving the chamber bathed in pale, calm light. The oppressive weight that had filled the hall lifted, replaced by a strange warmth, a sense of peace that neither had felt in years. The king lowered his hands, breathing heavily, and looked at the outsider. "It is done," he whispered. "The curse is broken." The outsider stared at him, awe and relief flooding through them. You survived." He smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "Because you were with me, because you believed." For a long moment they stood in silence, hand in hand, gazing at each other across the remnants of the shadows. The storm outside had passed, and a faint light of dawn crept through the high windows, casting golden streaks across the stone floor. "You changed me," he said quietly, "not with force, not with power, but with courage and trust. You saved me in a way no one ever could." The outsider's heart ached with emotion. "No," they said softly, "you saved yourself. You allowed me to stand with you." That is what changed everything. A silence fell over them, thick with meaning. The king stepped closer, and the outsider could feel the warmth of his body, the intensity of his gaze. "And now," he asked, voice low and intimate, almost a whisper, "what becomes of us?" The outsider met his eyes, steady and unwavering. "We move forward together." A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips, a rare and beautiful thing. "Together," he echoed. They stepped outside into the citadel's courtyard, where the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon. The black roses of the garden glimmered with morning dew, no longer threatening but radiant, as if the curse had been lifted from them too. The outsider breathed in the fresh air, feeling the weight of the night lift from their shoulders. The king stood beside them, tall and regal, yet no longer distant. He had shed the shadow of his curse, yet the power and intensity remained, a man remade by love, trust, and courage. "You will remember this night," he said softly, the growl in his voice now tempered with warmth. "Forever." The outsider smiled, feeling a thrill that was both joyful and profound. "I will," they said, "and it will guide me always." He extended his hand, and together they walked through the garden, leaving behind the shadows and the curse. The citadel, once a place of fear and isolation, now seemed alive with hope. The sky, painted in pale gold and soft pink, mirrored the transformation that had taken place within them both. In that moment, nothing existed except the two of them, bound not by fear, not by power, but by trust, understanding, and the promise of a shared future. The night that had begun with shadows, danger, and whispered threats had ended in light, redemption, and the unspoken truth that some bonds are forged not in ease, but in trials of fire and darkness. The king turned to the outsider, voice gentle now, almost tender. "You will remember a night with me for all the days of your life." The outsider's hand tightened around his. "And I will," they whispered, "because it was the night everything began." The wind carried the scent of black roses, now blooming in the light of dawn. And in the heart of the citadel, a new chapter began, one of hope, trust, and a connection that no shadow, no curse, and no darkness could ever break.